Everyone, welcome back YouTube. Today we're watching another video from the Pancreas No Work, watching the Do or Don't World Eaters. Thank you for watching. Please support the original channel. Please support Pancreas. He makes great content, uh, as you see, like reacting to. Now let's get to the video.
I unga and therefore I bunga. These are words that have held true throughout all of human
Unga
history.
bunga.
It's gotten more complicated in modern times, to be sure. Tanks, guns, planes, all things that have vastly complicated the process of eliminating our fellow man. But at the end of the day, the person with the better tank may choose to run you over if it pleases them. The person with all the nukes holds all the cards. And in the 41st millennium, some people like to pretend that this isn't true. People like to pretend that in 40K there's all these grand plans and goals and allegiances and whatnot. That the people in this setting aren't all just murder hobos, and that every single goal
True.
they have isn't just an excuse.
40K is, and fantasy is just the perfect murder hobo paradise.
For more conflict. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong, and as proof, none other than the tagline of the setting itself. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Everything else is secondary at best, and probably only exists to explain how people can afford to always be at war. You can pretend it isn't true, but the setting status as a war game will always rear its ugly head. And for all that some deny it, others such as the World Eaters embrace it. Korn's chosen Space Marines are here to spread havoc and ruin across the galaxy, because motivations are all well and good, but sometimes the nails are biting and it's time to throw down. And while you can be tactical in your battles, you're here to unga bunga. So if you want to paint the town red and the town as the entire galaxy, then step right up and join the World Eaters. They'll take you one and all, as long as you don't mind the oceans of blood and mountains of skulls. But before I begin, would you like to see something cool that's
Skulls
a
for the
perfect
skulls,
Christmas gift to
really.
grab early? Because behold Novium, the
Blood
sponsor
for the
of this
blood
video. Novium makes innovative high-end products that are equal parts desk art and functional tool. Inspired by nothing short of the heavens and cosmos themselves, these aerospace-grade aluminum pens float around on their base on a magnet without any electricity required. The hover pen Interstellar sits at a 23.5-degree angle, the exact same as the very Earth we live upon. It received the Time Award for Best Invention, and not only does it come in 4 different colors to personalize it to your specifications, but you can even get yourself a premium version with nothing less than a meteorite embedded in the tip. But for those of you who prefer a more futuristic look, here's the HoverPen Future. At a full 60-degree tilt, it looks even more futuristic than the Interstellar, and you can get it in deep black, frost silver, or mist blue. With interchangeable tips, you can find the way to write that suits your need perfectly. If you'd like to grab yourself a cool piece of desk art or send someone close to you an amazing gift, then here's something from me to you. Use code Pancreas or click the link below to get yourself 20% off all hover pens. That's the link below and code Pancreas for 20% off all hover pens. Offer only available for the next 48 hours after this video goes live. For the perfect bit of functional desk art, you can do no better than Novium, so grab yourself a hover pen today. Now then, time to push the limits of rushing forward and stabbing someone in the face. The World Eaters, from their very inception by the Emperor, were similar to what they grew up as, just a bit less corny. Called the Warhounds at first, they were for the most part taken from already bloodthirsty candidates and were happy to do some dirty work whenever the Emperor needed them to. Their first action saw them deployed to a colony that had risen up in rebellion, because even this early on, a whole lot of people weren't convinced they wanted to be a part of this whole Imperium thing. They pacified the world in only a few hours, and when their leader was asked how many prisoners they managed to take, he responded by saying that no one told him he had to take any prisoners. So, yeah, they weren't exactly the kindest of folks.
Take prisoners, what's that?
Just because their brains weren't full of tetanus yet. Eventually, they were grouped into the 13th Expeditionary Fleet, also known by anyone out of their earshot as the Bloody 13th. It seemed to be a force entirely comprised of assholes as brutal as the Warhounds were, whether or not they were Space Marines, because completely obliterating worlds might as well have been their modus operandi. Sanguinius himself called the entire thing a carnival of monsters, which isn't wrong, but that's a little bit hypocritical of you, isn't it, Mr. Redthirst? For their Primarch's part, Angron was busy getting nails jammed into his brain and trying to save his fellow gladiators and slaves by way of a planet-side rebellion on the world of Nuceria. It didn't quite work, but then the Emperor showed up and told him to come with him so we could help him conquer the galaxy. Angron told him to piss off while he died alongside his brothers and sisters in arms, whereupon Big E went back to his ship and teleported Angron to it so one of his main pet science projects he sometimes views as his kids didn't bite it on a backwater world. Angron,
Oh,
naturally,
Emperor.
was not happy with this. He was so unhappy with it that every time a Warhounds captain came up to him
That's a
asking what
cooler
the plan
piece.
was, any changes he'd like to make now that their Primarch was back, he'd just kill them. This continued on for several captains until we finally got to Karn, who wasn't a betrayer yet and was all around a fairly cool dude. Karn managed to talk him down, and then Angron renamed them the World Eaters, and off to continue butchering they went. And butcher they did. One time the World Eaters were working alongside the Luna Wolves and Ultramarines. In one corner, we have the guy who, before getting the last name Heresy, was a fairly cool dude and good enough to lead the entire
Good man
crusade at one
Horus.
point, as well as his blueberry brother, who has not only great strategic skills but an actual functioning moral compass. In the other corner, Angron. Angron landed on the world while Horus and Gilliman were debating how to best proceed without causing too much damage, and proceeded to Angron all over the place alongside his sons. By the time the two competent Primarchs were able to rein things in, basically everyone was dead and the entire planet was in ruins. They yelled at him, and even Big E was a bit mad, but Angron didn't care, and Big E didn't care enough to give him the lost Primarch treatment, so it was instead just decided to only send the World Eaters to the fringes of space or against enemies always intended to be genocided. The Legion itself during this time started becoming Khorne worshippers in all but name. Angron had them fight in brutal pits where anyone surviving was, let's just call it a bonus. He called it training, but this was just gladiatorial arenas. He would order them to be able to take a world entirely in 31 hours, roughly how long a Caesarian day was. Not only did this further drive them into warmongering, because when you only have 31 hours to conquer a planet, trying to limit your collateral damage becomes damn near impossible, but if they failed, he had the Legion decimate itself. You know, Perturabo showing up to his Legion and telling them to kill 1 in 10 of themselves? Angron did that on the regular. At one point he just left his Legion for a few years until Karn once again managed to pull him back into the fold, which at this point I think he really should have given up on trying that. It probably would have been better for everyone. And of course,
Karn's the only good one.
Angron wanted his sons to know true pain and suffering like Caesarians did or whatever, and Space Marine creation involves massive amounts of brainwashing, so all the World Eaters wanted to be like the organ donor they think is their father. Early on in Angron having all his kids jam nails in their head like daddy, it would just kill them. Eventually the process was largely perfected, and almost all of the remaining legions had the nails implanted in their heads, just like Angron. Perfected just like Dad, generously, because they were poor copies of what is, in spite of its horrific nature, a piece of highly advanced archaeotech, but it got the job done in making them full of rage and hate like Daddy Dearest. The only regular exception to this were World Eater Psychers, who still died when the nails were implanted no matter what, because being a wizard sucks in Warhammer. Well, I did say this before, now they really were Khorne worshippers in all but name. They continued on as they had already become, but even worse. The Space Marine Legion you throw at the worst enemies in situations where you don't care if they deliver you a worthwhile planet or a ruined hellscape. Sometimes planets would outright surrender at the mere threat of the World Eaters arriving, the reputation for unmatched barbarism apparently becoming known outside of Imperial space. Naturally, anyone who didn't surrender had their entire society erased from history. And of course, before the heresy was the biggest nothing burger of an event that a lot of people like to talk about, the Night of the Wolf. Leman Russ, bless him for leading the worst Space Marine Legion / chapter.
No, I know Pancreas hates him. I know the reputation of 1, Space Furries, 2, Mary Sue's, but I will defend them. They're the reason I got in here, into the fandom. I will defend them with all my might.
To teach Angron why he was an idiot and being a bloodthirsty moron was wrong.
Space Wolves are cool.
Things got heated, as you no doubt expect.
They're cool guys, please,
And it got to a point where Angron had Leman dead to rights, but a whole bunch of Space Wolves had him dead to rights. Everyone slinked back home, and Leman and the Wolves say they won because they could have killed Angron, whereas Angron and the World Eaters says he won because he beat Leman in a fight and easily could have killed him, which is all that matters to him. It was at least cool to see Leman being a bro and genuinely trying to help his brother see reason. As for who was actually right, neither of them.
Leman's always a bro. He is the GOAT. I need to actually read some books with Leman, but I think I read majority of all the origins of Ragnar, but no, it's cool. It's I don't know. I get it though. The Mary Sue-ness, I get. They're the pseudo. They're the blueberries of. They're the secondary blueberries, but I would say the same thing with the Blood Angels, maybe.
Ron is a monstrous, murderous moron, whether or not he admits it or gives reason for it, which he admittedly occasionally has, and Lehman Russ tried to talk sense to someone with nails jammed in their head. Some real
True.
intellectuals, those Primarchs. Although Snorri Nosebiter, my beloved, also had nails jammed into his head, and he could see reason well enough, so maybe this was just an Angron problem. Moving forward, getting the World Eaters and Angron to turn traitor was basically a matter of Horus bringing up Angron's homeworld and calling the Emperor a weak bitch. He also starts the Horus Heresy's prequel act, not even the first official event, the behind-the-scenes preparation on Istvan III, by messing it up. See, Horus would have been happy to have just virus-bombed the planet and left it at that. Even
I like his wolf pelt has gone eviler when Horus starts going a little tainted with chaos, a little darky, a little dark.
Marine of all time and allowed most of the loyalists sent down to the planet to die to reach safety, Horus would have likely just shrugged and bombed it again. But Angron, dear Angron, decided to go down to Istvan and deal with surviving loyalist sons personally, delaying the heresy greatly, and quite frankly, this entire event might have been how the traitors lost. Be it out of bloodlust or wanting to grant his sons at least a semi-honorable death, him rushing in arguably caused the loyalists on the planet to hold up the traitors for months longer than they otherwise would have been able to. I would at least like to shout out the World Eaters loyalists down there. Even with the Butcher's nails, they proved that they had more in their minds than blind hate and devotion to their dead. Real ones without a doubt. Angron's actions here, at least in my opinion, are a good way to look at how the World Eaters perform as a whole. Angron and his legion were absolute blenders. If you enter melee with them, you're royally screwed. But the moment the slightest amount of subtlety or forethought is required, their chances of winning go out the window. When you need a hammer for a nail, there's no better choice. If you don't need a hammer, though, they're the worst possible one. They'd probably eat any hammer you gave them, for that matter. As with all the traitor legions who became lost in the chaos sauce, the World Eaters started noticing more outward corruption not too long into the heresy. Blood leaking from their ships, blood leaking from the ship showers. It was mostly a lot of blood, given they were falling to Khorne. Then there was the captain of Angron's personal flagship, Lotara Sare,
She's
who
cool.
would become more and more bloodthirsty by association. Also, her own personality, too. She was part of the fleet attached to these maniacs, remember? She killed a bunch of mutineers for abandoning the shit show this legion was becoming, and was overall a real hard-ass of a commander. Meant in a good way, of course. Towards the end of the heresy, she fused with her ship's command chair and became this fleshy monstrosity thing.
Gross.
This mess also floating around the ship. The quote-unquote nice spirit of Lotara may or may not have been partially constructed by the flagship's own machine spirit as well, but however you want to imagine a regretful ghost coming about probably works just fine. Angron's
as a cool scary scary game or scary like mission, if you're somehow on that ship and you hear her talking and having the ship actually try to kill you. Monster house, but monster ship.
Attempted to use a genuine attempt to save his life. Gilliman got his ass beat during this little tidbit of lore trying to stop it, though if I may speak in his defense, I think 2v1ing any pair of Primarchs and not dying from the attempt speaks plenty as to how badass someone is, win or not.
I guess.
The World Eaters themselves have pretty much lost any chance of redemption at this point, both as their Primarch became a demon prince of Khorne and their last remaining Psykers died trying to stop Angron's ascension. It should be noted that even Karn, fairly likable as far as traitor marines go, at one point was offered to have the nails removed by 1,000 Sun Sorcerer, or at least to have their effects somewhat nullified. He beat the guy to death. At the Siege of Terra, the World Eaters sure were present. They weren't really a part of anything properly planning related, on account of even as lost in the chaos sauce.
Another good image.
Horus had learned not to trust Angron's judgment by this point. The World Eaters were utilized, of course. They were oftentimes the first legion sent into any breaches formed. But the World Eaters as a legion by this point weren't really there for ending the Imperium or revenge against the Emperor. Some of them may have said they were there for that.
Another
but they
great
were
art
really
piece.
there for killing, maiming, and
Warhammer art's so good.
Apart that Terra's people are still suffering from PTSD of it to the modern day of the setting. But after Horus died, they still, alongside the rest of the traitor legions, fled the planet. Their last act as a legion, rather than warbands, would be the Battle of the Planet Scalathrax. Karn the Betrayer is a pretty swell guy. He doesn't take no nonsense, he's good in a fight, and of course as a Khornate Berserker, and indeed arguably Khorne's favorite in 40k, he's all about fighting for the Blood God. Well, Scalathrax put a hindrance on that kind of thing, because the planet was so cold even Space Marines were freezing inside their armor. It was the World Eaters versus the Emperor's children, too, so if it was too cold for those sensation freaks, you know it was freezing. So everyone on the planet instead started hiding in what shelter there was, waiting for the temperature to rise a bit so they could resume fighting. Karn, to put it frankly, was not
Did
a
not
fan
give
of
a
this.
shit.
So
Yeah.
Karn grabbed a flamer and just started torching anyone nearby to burn down their shelter and get them out. World Eater, Emperor's Children, a random person who
Damn.
somehow survived the previous fighting, it didn't matter, and because of his antics, the two legions fought over what little shelter remained once more. The World Eaters, as well as the Emperor's Children, were now fractured as a legion. For the longest time, they weren't really a coherent fighting force. Rather, they were a bunch of differing war bands selling their services off to the highest bidder, or
Yeah,
just
that makes
murder
sense.
hoboing around, to be honest with you.
That makes. I mean, Emperor's Children and World Eaters are. I can imagine are the most mercenary slash like war bandy, going outside their zone fairly often. Just because one, if there's any somewhat conscious World Eaters, they don't like their daddy. And then with the Emperor's Children, just look at him. Look at this guy. I doubt he cares if he's still following his legion or whatever gives him the most sensation. Ugh.
If there's a warband of Chaos Marines that acts like D&D adventurers and treats everyone around them as XP, it'd be the World Eaters.
True.
Somewhat similar to the Emperor's Children, the World Eaters would occasionally band together again for a bit if someone sufficiently powerful
I like that's
could
cool.
gather
I like
enough
that
warbands
armor
under their
or the
banner.
demon.
The Black Crusades.
I wish there is more unique, interesting like demon. Like I know there are some demon infested like Space Marines, or like demon shifted in some like in models. But I wish like something like this would be so cool. Like having the armor active, like exactly like this armor alive, and you can do it in different ways. The like demon, like what's his name from Soul Calibur? Darkness, or whatever the Dark Knight's called. I forget. But like, oh, that'd be so cool. I
The
want
main
more
way
of
this
that.
would happen when most of the Chaos Marines came together to bash their brains against Cadia 13 times in a row. And naturally, many of them followed behind Angron during those times when he decided he was going to take a chunk out of an Imperial sector or 100, such as during the First War for Armageddon. He was there. This was an event, as much as the months of shame and orcs tend to overshadow his own appearance. For the most part, though, World Eaters' warbands have struck me as wandering problems. They're almost like an environmental hazard. If a World Eater's warband rolls through your neighborhood, you evacuate or board up the windows and pray you make it through the storm. And as is becoming standard for modern 40k, we're going back to the Horus Heresy. With Angron becoming much more prominent in the setting again, as all the other demon Primarchs are, so too have the World Eaters rallied behind their Primarch. The amount of worlds falling under siege by their forces grows ever larger, although siege is perhaps the wrong word since it implies
It looks like
conflict.
that World Eater is surrounded by the bodies of the old World Eater armors, but I know you don't. I can't even tell what. I think it's just normal Space Marine, but it looks a little bit. It's also the same colors as what the old World Eaters look like.
As opposed to tens of thousands of Space Marines raining from the sky
that was cool, though.
out of the warp to slaughter everyone around them.
Warhammer is so cool, all of it, fantasy and
banished for longer than
40K.
a few months at a time, or to be specific, longer than 8 weeks, 8 days, and 8 hours.
Eight.
After all. More and more armies across the galaxy now have to face not only individual bands of the World Eaters, but forces of them reminiscent of the legions of old. If you want to carve a path of heretical slaughter across the Milky Way, there's no better option, so let's see what's going for them, shall we?
Or positives.
Talking about who could win 40k is always fun. If the Imperium fixed all its issues, at least as far as efficiency and bureaucracy goes, they'd go on a bender. If the Necrons are fully awake and fully united, they'd be unstoppable.
Yes.
The main body of the Tyranids, assuming such a thing like that truly is still out there,
easy one.
Power all life in the galaxy. It's fun, at least moderately thought-provoking, and ultimately meaningless. There would never be a win in 40k, because for there to be a win would mean that
I think there could be not a win. My opinion, I feel like there could be a next stage of evolution, right? In the sense of the Imperium got their shit together, so they're more powerful, but at the same time, it fractured. Like, in my opinion, it would be cool to see, like, hey, if we have the Imperium split, right? And then this is an insane opinion, and I know there's a lot of people will disagree, but Emperor awakens, but it's not the Emperor. It is the Chaos warp infused Emperor, the belief that people have in him being the fourth. He is the rat, and because in uh fantasy, or was it what what's it called? I can't think of the fantasy game. Um, the rats are the fourth chaos god, right? Which is cool. I like to say that with humanity, especially since a lot of people compare Skaven and humanity, or humanity is Skaven in 40k. Why not have the Emperor be the fourth one? I know I'm also some person's like, I would be cool to see the mercenary or the weapon maker warp shenanigan guy. Cool. But it makes sense if it's the Emperor. And like his sub faction, the Emperor sub faction of Chaos would just be, I guess it would just be, what's his name? The Chaos God that hates chaos. That would be the Emperor, but it would just be hate everything. And then obviously I think sisters would join parts. I mean, obviously Black Templars, Custodes, blah blah blah. Maybe some Custodes. Most likely all Custodes, but eh. But fractured out where the Primarchs that come back, Loyalist Primarchs, maybe some Chaos. There is room, but most likely all the Loyalist Primarchs, maybe the exception of a few of them who are just like Daddy Dearest. They don't give a shit. Stay with him. Gilliman, probably the Lion, whoever else, have their own version of the Imperium. Everything gets bigger and worse. So the Imperium gets stronger, orcs get stronger, maybe Corks come back. The main fleet of the Tyranids come, the Necrons are even bigger, Chaos is even stronger. Somehow the Eldar actually gets their time and space and become this bigger threat as well. Like everyone just becomes a bigger threat, which means everything's still at even playing field. Same thing for Town, same thing for Rotan, right? I would love that. Everything becomes quote unquote better, but it's not better. It's just everything actually is just significantly worse because every worst scenario is happening all at once for each and every faction.
The setting would end and there'd be no more war game for all of us.
But yeah, I also know there's no winner.
Such as the orcs are therefore the perfect army. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and the World Eaters absolutely love it. There is perhaps no other faction as perfect for the setting as the World Eaters, because they have no grander designs or goals beyond the next fight. Maybe one of them will plan a really big fight for Khorne, which requires them to have basic knowledge of keeping their underlings alive long enough to reach it, but that's it. The setting of 40k is one long-running excuse for there to be one science fantasy fight after the next, and the World Eaters are reveling in it. This army, beyond all others, is the one that perfectly fits the reality of Warhammer 40,000. Aside from that, the World Eaters are also perfect at any scale of conflict. A small band of World Eaters was for the most of the setting's history how they operated, as the strongest dude in a band of a few was able to rally them around him so he could direct them to new fights. That's indeed how they showed up in a Caiaphas Cain novel. It was funny because Cain just instructs the rest of his forces to follow behind the World Eater.
I also been reading, I think I've read 2 books, and I'm listening to some of the short stories. I don't want to fully read them all because I think it goes past what books I'm on, but Caiaphas Cain books are really good. I think great for a beginner of the 40k series.
Because he had basic knowledge of how Khorne doesn't like Slaanesh, and the World Eaters were slaughtering their way to a Slaaneshi ritual Cain also wanted to stop. But as you can see in more modern times, or during events like Armageddon and the Black Crusades, they can also amass in huge numbers to slaughter everyone in their way. This usually tends to result in the deaths of everything in front of them until they finally run out of steam, which based on their history can take up to 200 sectors and a few hundreds of billions of lives before that finally happens. Whatever your preference, be it narrative games at a few hundred points or
look at all that red.
The World Eaters are right at home. After all, who cares about if you've got friends around you in a fight? As long as there's a fight, you're happy. And while you can't expect the other side of this to return in the cons section, World Eaters aren't necessarily brutes who only care about violence and rage. The butcher's nails and Khorne worship ensure that's most of what they care about, but some of them also like other things. A fellow named Leor Vine Ukris was quite a snarky little fellow, proudly announcing to Abaddon himself one day that he and his pals were there to steal his ship. His preferred weapon was a heavy bolter he lugged around, showing not only that Khorne can have some variety beyond melee combat, but so can the World Eaters. He even enjoyed himself a nice drink, as shown when he sat down with Abaddon and another fella, and enjoyed himself a nice craft beer Abaddon had brewed. Well, yes,
That's
the
cool
World Eaters
armor.
ultimately just want violence. This doesn't contradict my previous point, because some of them like other things between the battles. If for no other reason than
Also, hold up. He has like an avatar arrow. Very cool mask. That's a cool version. It looks like you can even see the tendons in his through the armor parts right here. But I like the mask part. But this is just Avatar Last Airbender.
Previous point, because some of them like other things between the battles. If for no other reason than eventually you'll kill everything in your immediate area, sometimes you gotta do things that aren't fighting. And every now and again we get to see a World Eater have a personality and some things they like to do when they aren't fighting. The World Eaters are also
World
great
Eater
for you if you
personality.
hate wizards. As coordinate forces, anyone casting psychic powers around them is in for a terrible time if it isn't one hell of a spell they're throwing out.
Old art.
The 41st millennium has all sorts of mystical, otherworldly powers hanging around. The Eldar and their status as an ancient psychic race, aka Space Elves. The Thousand Suns and their mastery of warpcraft through the Changer of Ways machinations. Even
I
the
love that
average human
art.
psyker can wield tremendous etheric power against their foes. And sometimes you just want to tell all those people to go stuff it. Take your magical powers and shove them where the sun doesn't shine.
I don't like
The
magic.
Khorne berserkers can shove them up there themselves. No lube. So if you hate all this wizard crap, there's no better army. Even the Leagues of Otan have wizards, and they're dwarfs. That's an entry in the book to be sure, but for now it's just another positive for Angron's merry murderous band of miscreants. That being said, they are still plenty fantastical themselves. They live in hell, at least in part, for starters. Anyone who does or has made their home in the warp is at least a little bit
Another
towards
great
the
art.
fantasy side of things,
Great
all other
art.
things considered. Eightbound, meanwhile, are Khorne warriors who have 8 Khorne demons jammed into them. Exactly
Jesus.
how much humanity beyond the meat this leaves you with is rather uncertain, I have to imagine.
Oh my
but it shows that
God.
they do still interact with the fantastical parts of the setting, for as much as they hate plenty of them. If you worship someone called the Blood God, there's only so much you can really say you completely despise warp nonsense without being a bit of a hypocrite. For what is a chaos god if not warp nonsense? Glorious nonsense, though, to be clear. I wouldn't have them any other way.
But that's also just Khorne himself is a hypocrite because he also doesn't like magic and likes fight, but he also exists because of magic. So
as much as some warriors did try and form warbands not in service to Khorne, most of them are pretty firmly in the grasp of Special K. Speaking of hate, they're also for you if you hate Slaanesh but aren't cultured enough to be an Eldar player. Khorne hates Slaanesh more than any other for being a sissy who cares about things like emotions and having a good time. If you two hate the color pink, there's no better option than these lads. Eldar aside, of course, but I have to assume if you're collecting a World Eater's army, then the Eldar aren't even on your radar. Not as anything other than targets, that is. As Space Marines, there's also a level of respect you'll get that others don't. Horus Heresy and all that, remember? And to boil down what I mean is that if you want World Eaters to show up in some capacity, you won't be wanting much for it. Existing World Eaters fans that might complain they have less books than others, please remember that the Ultramarines are not the standard for 90% of factions in this game. Some people bet on the wrong horse and are Leagues of Otan fans. This next one isn't exactly the pinnacle of intelligent thought, meanwhile, but even Khorne haters have to admit that the World Eaters, by virtue of being Khornates, have the best battle cry in Warhammer. Skulls for the Skull Throne, blood for the Blood God. The full thing is a bit wordy for a battle cry, but it's so metal it
is
makes
great.
up for it. And if you want, you can always just say one half of it. It gets the point across well enough and saves your breath for when you're hacking people apart in glorious melee. And to end us off for this section, I will say that looking favorably at it, the World Eaters have one of the more tragic falls to grace out of all the traitor legions. Their Primarch was supposed to be an empath, but he had a massive amount of his brain replaced with ancient technology that made it so the only time he felt happiness, or at least peace, was when he was slaughtering people. When they finally met him, he would regularly either kill them, abandon them, ask far too much of them, or order them to kill each other. And then in one last desperate attempt to try and connect with their father, they all jammed copies of those same nails into their heads to be like him. The Warhounds could have been one of the nobler legions given a chance, but instead all they got was the endless bloodshed that would one day corrupt them to chaos. Looked at it in this light, his army is a tragedy. Sad, but no one watches a tragedy for the happy ending.
True.
Let's start broad with the army rules and detachments. Their army
I like
rule
that
is
color.
the Blessings of Khorne and the Pact of Blood.
That
Every time you
bronze.
start a battle round, you make a Blessings of Khorne rule. Aside from a cool bit showing how they do in fact interact with the warp, this lets you roll 8d6. If the dice you roll match any of the ones shown on the chart here, you can give your units that blessing for a turn.
Ooh.
You can use up to 2 of them, and they can let your units hit harder in a variety of ways, charge more reliably, hit on death. It's a solid set of abilities you've got to either make the most out of your melee
Warp
attacks or get
blades.
right into melee. Fake intellectuals think Warhammer 40k is a strategy game with tactics. True
No.
cornbrains know that fuck it, turn 1 charge is the only meta that matters. The
True,
different
true.
attachments, meanwhile, have all the flavors of hitting someone in the face with a chain axe you could possibly imagine. The Berserker Warband attachment helps units on the charge by making any following hits after a charge stronger and with an extra attack. The stratagems, meanwhile, are largely based around movement, with one for advancing and charging, one for giving a unit extra AP after a charge, and one that buffs a Blood Surge move, which I'll talk about later. A decent attachment if you plan on being mobile as well as in the line of fire, which is probably often, since some other stratagems are sticky objectives for a destroyed unit and subtracting damage from enemy attacks. Cults of Blood is the obligatory detachment to buff the shitters of your army, in this case the Chaff Jackal cultists. Them and the Goremonger kill team, I guess. During your command phase, you can select one of the idle abilities to be in effect until your next command phase. There's only 3 of them and you can only use one once, so be careful about using them. If they're close enough to a friendly World Eater unit, they can either add 1 to hit and wound rolls, 1 to moving, advancing, and charging, or grab a 4-up invuln save. These units aren't the strongest, at least compared to Berserkers, but they aren't terrible, and giving a shitty mob of 20 units a 4-up invuln save is gonna infuriate someone, no doubt, if you do it at the right time.
True
Walk into
that,
a
true
Tau
that.
firing line and laugh as the Blood God keeps their precious pulse rifles from scratching his warriors. The stratagems, sure enough, are about buffing these cultists in a variety of ways, be it directly making them stronger, or even with one bringing back a destroyed unit. Replacing, technically, but the end result is the goobers that got get to come back. Blood Tithe,
Nice.
meanwhile, is the I want to run demons detachment that seems to be how GW is handling demons going forward. Apologies to those of you who wanted to run Demons of Chaos as their own army, because I'm making the assumption they're going to be out, but hey, at least
No,
they're here.
we're
You
in
want
modern
the Beasts
day,
of
they're still
Chaos
here.
players. Remember, it can always get worse. Aside from running demons, the
And the
detachment...
sad thing about that, even though I haven't collected, like I have 40k stuff, and the fantasy stuff I have not done. Though, before I collected, I played Total War Warhammer. And what was my first faction when I first played the first Total War? Beastmen. And hearing all this shit that Beastmen has gone through on the tabletop to what the currently is sad. You really don't have nothing, and there isn't really a shot they're ever coming back. Maybe one day, but oh,
Attachment here lets you roll a
sad.
d6 if you destroy an enemy unit, and on a 3-up you get a Blood Tithe point that can be saved and used to buff your demons in a variety of ways, with each further ability requiring more points to activate. They do at least stay until
As
the
someone
end
who,
of battle.
as someone who likes bugs, or bugs is the main faction I would invest into. It's like, man, I wish fantasy had their Beastmen. Sag.
So choosing them is a bit less about timing and more of an economics game of which abilities you think you can get the most use out of, or if you want to save for the more expensive ones. The stratagems, however, aren't quite for buffing the actual demons.
Oh,
Rather,
really?
they instead allow you to either move the demons around, because deep striking bloodletters is a very scary thing, get more Blood Tithe points, or buffing World Eaters that are near the demons. The entire detachment feels like even more of an obligation than the chaff one that always exists, but on the bright side, I'm sure this one will be expanded when Demons as an army is finally axed. Bright side might not be the right word for that one on reflection. Possessed Slaughterbound, meanwhile, is far simpler than thinking about which buffs to play and how many points to spend. Any possessed unit that gets shot at and has a model destroyed can zoom d6 inches towards the enemy unit that shot them. I can appreciate this kind of playstyle because it's exactly how I play Counter-Strike. Pro tip to make people upset at you: challenge all sightlines with a shotgun. It'll either make the enemy team upset because some moron with a shotgun domed them running up mid like a clown, or make your team upset because you're a moron with a shotgun getting domed on mid like a clown.
True.
Either way, you have fun. The stratagems, meanwhile...
I didn't do that with Counter Strike, but I did with Valorant. And a couple of rounds, I got those shots in, and I won. I got some couple kills before I died.
buff possessed units. To avoid aging the video too much when the rules inevitably change, that's the gist of this detachment. Goretrack Onslaught is for those world eaters who prefer their manslaughter to be of the vehicular nature, because even with the butcher's nails, they are just barely smart enough to drive cars. Units disembarking from a transport can add 1 to charge rolls.
I like how they drive.
Or
I imagine they
disembark, which
drive
can be
like
brutal.
orcs
All of the
drive.
stratagems are for doing things like embarking easier, disembarking farther than normal.
It's
and
all
my
will
favorite
and
part,
not
which is the just
intention.
drunk driving straight through a terrain feature. Or we tied the cop who attempts to pull over Karn the Betrayer for going 500 in a 30. Vessels of Wrath lets you pick a few characters and allows them to have multiple blessings of Khorne active at the same time. Obviously very situational, but it can help supercharge a model into Super Saiyan territory. The stratagems meanwhile seem to be the Codex writers reaching into a hat and pulling them out at random. Subtract 1 to the wound rolls of certain attacks targeting you, or all attacks if it's a Vessel of Wrath.
I don't like the abbreviation of CP. Too many games do this. They need to stop doing that.
Benefiting from the detachment rule.
It's just a bad abbreviation. Terrible.
Why not? Force models falling back to take desperate escape tests. If you have no idea what you want out of your army or have absurdly specific battle plans because you got lost and thought Tzeentch was the red one, I'd recommend this detachment. As for Genmer rules, now that we're done there, you of course hit like a runaway truck in melee. Khorne to me is ideally a solid middle ground which we Nurgle and Slaanesh. You may not be as disgustingly resilient as Nurgle, but you're far faster. The inverse is naturally true for Slaanesh too, where you aren't quite as quick as her forces and in some select situations might not necessarily hit as hard, but you can last a hell of a lot longer. To showcase this, let's just look at the standard Khorne Berserker. At 8 inches of movement, they can get where they need to be reasonably quick, and there's a way to make them faster. At toughness 4, 2 wounds, and a 3-up save, they can take a decent beating before going down. At leadership 5, they're rather unlikely to battle shock, and with 4 strength 4, AP -1, and damage 1 attacks per model, they're going to be putting out a lot of hurt. That blood surge ability I mentioned earlier means that whenever one of them dies from an attack in the shooting phase, you can immediately run D6 plus 2 inches towards whatever shot them. There is no escape from them, because the Darth Vader scene from Rogue One can only be made scarier by adding another 18 Darth Vaders to the hallway.
True.
You can also take them in groups of up to 20. Of course, any amount of World Eaters can kill even special characters in melee. Did you know that? I know that. I know that because my first ever game of 40k was Eldar versus what I don't think was technically World Eaters, but the guy was only running Khorne units. Did you know that Eldrad versus a unit of Khornate Berserkers in melee does not favor Eldrad? I know that. I learned that one the hard way. It's 360 points for that unit of 20, but that's a whole lot of beatdown they can put out for those points. And even the Jackals can hit plenty hard.
Poor Pank.
Yeah, they're slower, their save is dog shit, and mostly only hit on 4s instead of 3s, but they're still toughness 4, which means wounding them isn't any easier than wounding the Marines, actually. Plus, they're not even half the cost, so swarming the battlefield with them isn't a horrible tactic, especially if you're running their dedicated detachment. This is the baseline melee of the army, and to avoid repeating the same basic point over and over again, just keep in mind that this is a constant. Just about everything that isn't the Land Raider or Predator is going to wreck shop when you're up close. Even those things are decent in melee because you're running someone over with a tank. Speaking of,
nice.
You do have some special sauce going in
melee tank. That'd be fun. That's a fun if they like took apart, you know, a Lehman Russ or whatever. Or no, I wouldn't. They wouldn't use a Lehman Russ. What am I talking about? I don't know what. I don't know the name of a tank the Space Marines have, but like a Space Marine tank, if there even is one. And just rip off all the cannon portion of it and just stick it with all sorts of melee. Like, I imagine flamers are allowed or appreciative under the Blood God, but mostly it is a ramming vehicle. Maybe even the cannon portion is just a ram, like ramming, like it goes back and then boom, and does that to a group of enemies. That would be fun.
The Rhino is the obvious one to me, because it's a transport. Aside from 12 inches of movement, meaning your World Eaters can rush into the fray even faster, if an enemy unit moves within 9 inches of them during their movement phase, you can immediately disembark the World Eaters within. Surprise, assholes. Karn and his friends are here to turn you into chunky salsa.
Now, also, this video is old, and also the next edition's coming out, so things probably will be changed, or definitely has changed.
Not have a choice in the matter. The Rhino, in a funny turn of events, is also half the cost of the World Eaters you can put it in. So just throw it out there once it's served its transporting purpose. Hell, just put it in front of a lane and block off a section of the map from an opponent. That'd be infuriating for your opponent if they didn't plan on your Khornate melee army pulling a door stuck on them.
Door stuck!
Door stuck! Fully commit to it being a melee monster, and on top of that, after
Hellbrute
shooting or fighting it, it can attack again. The rule is just called Frenzy, which is appropriate.
But the fire alert, oh, I want to get it so bad. It looks so cool. And I missed out on getting like the Iron Warriors bundle that came out. Oh, I want that. But I know once Perturabo comes out and then he has a little army, I'm getting it so fast, so fast.
Sound are whirlwinds of death, hitting its strength 8 that can rend entire units into nothing in a single turn, with the exalted variant being a bit better at taking down vehicles and monsters. And Khorne is no stranger to big scary Death Stars to throw at your enemy, as is expected of the Blood God. You can run
Blood
Scarbrand
God.
in your army, which I feel needs little if any explanation. He's Scarbrand. He's gonna ruin someone's day.
Scarbrand,
The Lord of
Scarbrand.
Skulls, blessed be whatever the hell the designer of this model was smoking when they made it.
Such a
You
good
roll
model.
another D6 for your blessings roll, and has phenomenal weaponry for both ranged attacks and, of course, melee.
Such
True,
a
the
cool
ranged hits
model.
are a bit random and only hit on 4, so they can potentially be whiffs, but if you're averaging out
Whiff.
2d6 attacks with rapid fire 3 and strength 14, I'm sure they're gonna wound more often than not. At a 3-up save and 5-up invuln, it doesn't have the tankiest saves around, but with 24 wounds, it'll at least take a while to crunch through one. It also has an inherently demoralizing effect on the enemy player, because this thing's penis is a gun. But of course, a legion is defined by their Primarch, and Angron sure as hell is indicative of what you get from the World Eaters as a whole. As it turns out, the Demon Primarch of Khorne hits quite hard. 16 attacks for his sweep, or 8 attacks for his
Angron
cleave,
is such a
with
cool
either strength
model.
14 or 7 means he'll be hurting most things more often than not.
Must
Hitting
be
on
your
2s means you're
warlord.
almost guaranteed to at least hit. His Wrathful Presence rule lets you pick one of 3 abilities each battle round, be that re-rolling up to 6 of your blessing dice, forcing leadership tests if nearby enemy units try to fall back, or letting nearby friendly units ignore modifiers to hitting and wounding rolls.
Nice.
Incidentally, this means that Angron does more for his army than Kain, who is an outright god of war instead of just a rage demon. He has fly, he's tough with a 2-up save, 4-up invul, and 16.
There's Eldar. I would love if Eldar got some appreciation and given actual everything. We know it ain't ever happening. Or not ever, but it ain't happening for a minute. They have to be the main army against whatever like 12th or 13th edition comes out. But also as someone who would love to have like get another model or a little PNG of what would a 40k version be, which is between obviously having my bear being a little servitor, like skull thing or a little baby thing with wings, or what would I get out of bear form and look like? I'd probably be an Exodite with a little bear hood. There you go. So
Wounds, and most importantly, he can
Eldar has
respawn.
a place in
If
my
he dies, you
heart,
can bring him
just
back
the one that
later
no one
on.
talks
Deep
about.
strike him onto the battlefield with 8 wounds.
And clowns. Clowns is the main thing I like about, which also would have a portion of my model would have like a part of a clown mask or a clown mask resting like a necklace on the chest piece of or chest part of that model. But
Left, as long as you roll a 666 on your Blessings of Khorne roll. There are some problems with him we'll get back to for the rules downsides, but this does help alleviate
I like
normal
the
problem
unliked
of super models like
characters
him, where you feel
sometimes.
really stupid with some dickhead
Or
with a
unused.
shadow sword sends the centerpiece of your entire army straight to hell. Their characters are also quite good. Karn is also a monster like Angron, hitting hard, letting units use leading re-roll hit and wound rolls of
I want to
1,
get Karn
all
so
for the low
bad.
cost of 100 points. Make sure to end the charge phase in engagement range of an enemy, though. Otherwise, he might just
to
kill a
have
bodyguard
him.
unit. A Lord Invocatus can give the unit he leads Deep Strike, always horrifying, and can let them deal some free wounds on the charge. A Slaughterbound lets you bring back a model and a unit they lead in the command phase, also gives the unit they lead Deep Strike, and once a game can give themselves 3 extra attacks for a total of 9 at Strength 10. Those attacks all get devastating wounds, by the way. All the World Eater characters are butchers through and through, and they'll do butcher's work. The World Eater's positive, in summation, is that they can deliver one hell of a beatdown in melee as you'd expect, but they do have a surprising amount of options to throw people a curveball
Another
with,
good
and even bring a bit of
art
ranged
piece.
firepower. If you just want to brain dead smash your opponent, that's perfectly viable, but you can do some tricksy moves if you want to keep the enemy on their toes, or at the very least rush into melee a lot quicker than they might be expecting you to. For the thinking caveman, the World Eaters aren't a bad army. All that said, I am myself, and hold a grudge against Khorne's forces for what they did to Eldrad, so allow me to complain a bit.
Of course.
To start us off is that while you are in some ways the forces of the favorite Chaos God, you're also the forces of the Chaos God GW uses to make someone else look cool. Cornate Berserkers are a
True.
great way to showcase how strong someone is, because holy crap, look at how that main character just soloed a World Eater. Thunder Warriors took on the early World Eaters at a KD ratio of 4-1. Caiaphas
Thunder
fought one and
Warriors.
came out on top, albeit that one was with some help from Jurgen's trusty Meltagun.
Jurgen is his
Punched back
king,
one when he
so.
woke up from his nap, and perhaps most glaringly of all, the Lion killed Angron as part of his own post-nap workout. You are the avatar of Kane of Chaos factions, be warned. For every event where they wreak more havoc than anyone else could, there's one where a World Eater who should by all rights win gets destroyed to make the protagonist look cool. Marnius Calgar ripped off a Lord of Skull's head for Khorne's sake. Similar to Khorne's Age of Sigmar lore, in the background his forces are soloing armies far beyond what anyone else could hope to take on. In the focused lore, they're jobbers a lot of the time. Special shout out to the Butcher's Nails, by the way, for being so well built that they've apparently survived Angron becoming a demon prince. They reform on him every time he dies, and when Sanguinius ripped them out of his head, Angron was pleading for him to stop because of how bad it hurt. People tell me I'm coping as an Eldar fan. The real cope is every time someone says Angron is scary. Although in fairness to the Marnius Calgar incident, not only is he the spiritual liege and
Such a cool image.
the greatest of us all, but it was in a Marvel comic. I don't want nuanced character development in my 40k Marvel comic. I want cool shit. Another problem is something that all Chaos factions struggle a bit with, but it's worse here than everyone else, except maybe some Slaanesh characters and factions. Some people I've spoken to, such as my Lore Crimes co-host, as well as others, have mentioned how in 40k, the Chaos characters are rather one-dimensional compared to their 30k selves. They're all stereotypes of their faction from top to bottom. Now I argue that this isn't a bug, it's a feature. Their character arc was falling to chaos. We got to see them do so during the Horus Heresy, and now in 40k, they're at their final incarnation as a corrupted servant of their chosen patron. This could be something you can ignore, because as much as people like the narrative of the heresy and whatnot, there's some amount of expectations you need to set when you choose an army of the people who scream blood for the blood god at every possible moment. If you can accept that their narrative arc has ended, and that the Horus Heresy has ended, please GW, for the love of God, stop putting out these books. This isn't a problem. What's a related problem is that the way World Eater character arcs end is almost always less interesting than anyone else's. Mortarion has been told by the Emperor himself he may one day be redeemed. That's huge. Beyond that, though, some traders
That'd be
like
cool.
Fabius have all sorts of
Again, from my theory of how the Emperor can split, it could easily be Mortarion joins the fake Emperor and just goes to another Chaos God, and then more jokes on Mortarion of his daddy issues, or of him actually being redeemed and joining his fellow non-traitor Primarchs, or the Loyalist Primarchs. But
evil plots and ways to advance their schemes. The Thousand Sons are all about that as well, and plenty of other Nurglite characters at least have different ways to do what they do. The end result of just about every World Eater character arc, meanwhile, is men who swing at a club good. Maybe you'll get someone like Lior who shoot at a machine gun good, but that's likely to be it. Even Slaanesh characters, all drowning in hedonism as they are, at least might like different things excessively. A World Eater character arc ends with them becoming murderous psychotics who ultimately live for battle and nothing else. This too can be ignored, and quite frankly, I'm going to be a bit mean for a moment and say that if you're trying to force the 40k World Eaters to be meaningful or highly nuanced characters, you're without a doubt barking up the wrong tree and need to accept that their fall was building up to this and only this. But
I would agree with
like
that.
Other things, and some of them like guns over chain axes, at the end of the day, every World Eater is the same at their core. A violent, bloodlusted killer. The World Eater who runs a therapy business in his spare time for bloodletters who got ganked by a named Ultramarine is a World Eater that only exists in fan stories. So if you want anything more, you'd best look elsewhere. Looking at their fall uncharitably, compared to what I said earlier, it's stupid. It's so goddamn stupid. Not even for just the way it happened, the fact they were allowed to exist long enough for it to happen. The Emperor does the stupidest thing possible when getting Angron off of Nuceria. Angron falls both because his dad is a dickhead and because someone jammed nails in his brain. His entire legion, almost to a man, also jams nails in their brain because they think that makes sense. And I'm not even the only one who thinks it's stupid, because when Lotara Sarin woke up a dreadnought to fight off boarding Ultramarines, he also was sitting there thinking to himself how dumb it was they all volunteered to have their own nails implanted. It's half a step up at best from Fulgrim's fall being because he couldn't tell the difference between his subconscious and the penis sword's thoughts. At least that one you can blame on things like the Horus Heresy almost certainly not being intended to last as long as it did, so they rushed some
The
stuff
art piece
early
is so
on.
cool.
Or if you want to cope, you can always say Slanesh herself was influencing Fulgrim's sword, so the effects were subtler and worse. With Angron, the fall genuinely does come about because Big E is a moronic deadbeat father, and because almost no one in the World Eaters thought replacing their gray matter with hate technology was a bad idea, not worth their dad's potential love. Maybe I'm the asshole here, but if one of my parents told me they'd only love me if I got a lobotomy, I'd probably just accept I'm never talking to them again.
True.
The Emperor himself looked at Angron's brain, realized it was partially removed, and he physically couldn't be at peace unless he was fighting, and still didn't just pull the plug, because even after 40,000 years of life, he never internalized the sunk cost fallacy. Yes, Karn being friends with Argel Tal and beating the brakes off of Erebus was well done, and shows even at their worst, they can still have some semblance of compassion. Yes, Karn having Shulk-style future visions of Sigismund's Black Templars waging war across the galaxy was awesome. And then you turn around and look at the fact that no one has shot pre-Demon Angron with a Nova cannon when they really should have. Or someone in a position of power should have done literally anything about the entire Legion having the nails implanted in them beyond looking grumpy over the fact. So many chances to do anything about the World Eaters, but apparently the writers couldn't think to answer why anyone didn't take any of those chances except by having Leman Russ get beat up by Angron and then sulking home after the fact. And certain things like moments for the Emperor and Malkador implying the heresy was planned in some ways rings so hollow to me when you look at the World Eaters and try to say not obliterating them was the best option. It's the same as when Infinity War did the "there's only one possible timeline we win" thing, because if you don't perfectly explain why that's the case, you look silly. Any implication that Angron and his sons needed to stay around, especially once the Emperor felt confident enough in the Great Crusade to go back home to Terra and leave it to Horus, strikes me as incredibly silly. For a less annoyance-fueled downside, the World Eaters being more of a plot device than actual character is always going to be felt. Them being rage monsters means their motives for going somewhere is that there's a fight there. That is a fun motivation, but that's about it. And truth be told, if you only want that, you should just go play orcs instead. They have the same mentality, but they're green, funny, and have guns. I'll make this next gripe quick, since the longer I do this, the more I realize complaining about it doesn't mean anything. Since Angron's back, the World Eaters are now going to suffer from the Primarch attention problem, and that no one is going to care about anyone else because Angron is back. Maybe it'll hit them a bit less hard because since they're all mindless berserkers, it doesn't mean as much that he's back. Or it'll hit them 10 times as hard because he's the biggest violent berserker in town. Either way, Angron has returned to the front lines, so it's time to accept that everyone else is going to be pushed back into the sidelines. And to end off with something almost objective, the last lore downside is that the World Eaters aren't really for those of you who also enjoy turtling in strategy games and that kind of thing. This is kind of a rules downside too, now that I think about it. Emperor building, conquering in the name of someone, none of that here. Where they go, a barren wasteland covered in blood follows. So if you do want a chaos force that can do something destructive, and Magnus's little planet of the sorcerers shows that you can do that sort of thing, you'd best look elsewhere. Although, again, I'm sure you knew that coming into the faction.
Tabletop downside.
The first problem here is that you are the most obvious army in all of 40k. For all that you can do some tricksy things, those tricksy things are all going to be potentially unexpected ways to rush into melee. A given opponent might be surprised you could enter the fray in a certain way, but no one's going to be surprised that you entered melee, just how you did it. Much like any melee-focused army, you're a one-trick pony, a trick you do very well, but everyone knows it's basically all you got. Those corny berserkers kick ass in melee, but no one's going to be impressed by their shooting just because one of them brought a plasma pistol along. The Predator, Lord of Skulls, and a few other things do have decent shooting attacks, but if you're relying on those, then you're solely relying on them. If for some reason you decided to turn Khorne into a shooty army, you won't have enough choppy to back it up. Everyone knows what you want to do, and while you have a few different hows when it comes to actually doing it, you don't have enough to be truly unpredictable. Funny as it is, the first time you drive a rhino through a terrain piece, after that happens, the players in your friend group are probably going to expect you to do that and take appropriate countermeasures. Relatedly, the World Eaters are not an army you can play passively. Most Warhammer armies, granted, require some amount of thought beyond setting up a trench line and waiting for the enemy, but the World Eaters as a melee army have it worst of all. If you aren't running in, you're going to lose as your enemy's ranged weapons lay into you and slowly chip away at your forces until they sweep in turn 4 and win turn 5 at the last second. You need to be proactive and get out there. You can take
Mm-hmm.
hits, and sometimes it's no doubt a better option for your berserkers to force the enemy to come to them by taking a critical objective first, but at some point of the game, you need to take the initiative. If that's not your playstyle, then I would recommend you stay away from the World Eaters. A lot of your ranged options, speaking of, are things like the Lord of Skulls, which is, as of time of recording, over 500 points.
Oh
It's a
my.
massive firing magnet, and if you're sinking all your points into it to squeeze some range value out of the army, you need to either have a plan or do what the Emperor should have done with Angron and learn when to cut your losses and just try something else. Nothing else is quite as extreme in terms of how much you stand to lose if the thing gets blown up, but your ranged options are both noticeable for them being ranged options at a Khorne army and tend to be single model units that are easy to focus fire on. Anyone with a solidly mobile army is likely going to know that if they blow up your tanks and dick gun mech, they can spend the rest of the match kiting you around and taking pot shots at you with near impunity. Being a bit pricey is also a common thing across the board, to be honest. 360 points for 20 berserkers gets you a whole lot of melee action, but some dickhead with a squad of Dark Reapers in their backline is gonna pick them off and laugh the whole time. Cover and terrain are the name of the game, and since for the most part you can't match anyone's range, you need to smartly move up the board so you don't lose 500 points worth of models by turn 2. Your detachments are also kinda mid. Even as bad at proper balancing knowledge as I am, I can almost guarantee you the reason for this. It's because at any moment, your army rules can give your army sustained hits, lethal hits, or devastating wounds against infantry. And I'd like to remind you that mid doesn't mean bad. +1 to attacks and +2 strength on the charge for melee weapons is going to rip people apart.
I love those. I love those. Look at these models. I love the demon infested ones. So cool.
But 2 different detachments just gave up and made a stratagem that's situational sticky objectives. Some of the things you can do in a given detachment.
Demon machines are also my favorite. That's why I think until Alpha Legion becomes real, Iron Warriors are my favorite Chaos Marine faction. Just because I love I love Demon Engines so much, and that's a big aesthetic with them. Like again, the Filer came out with that concept in mind. And the new, I forgot the other big, like chunkier like the something like this. I love demon infested shit, so cool. Yeah, but the moment Alpha Legion comes out, oh boy, which is I think another faction that could easily be, it's chaos but could join the Imperium or be a in between, right?
They don't necessarily need to be, because
like they already are,
Angron
sort of,
maybe
sometimes.
Tends to balance out the need for tactical decisions, but just be aware of it. As with the Emperor's Children, you also don't have very many unique kits to your name as of time of recording this. They're a newish army in some regards, so this isn't a complete shock, but a lot of their models are borrowed from the standard Chaos Space Marines. What you have looks cool, but expect that a lot of your units are going to be eerily similar to someone else's army. Just because you painted the Chaos Terminators red doesn't mean they aren't still just the normal Chaos Terminators. Angron deserves special mention as a problem child, meanwhile. This is obviously an extreme example, but a little while back, me and another fella tested out a fun little match. 5 Angrons versus 5 Avatars of Cain. Angron, as it turns out, is not terribly good against roughly equivalent models if they have a shooting attack. Now, aside from the obvious reason this can't happen, this was in a no longer applicable scenario. I could pump a fate die into letting Cain have exploding 6s on his gun attack, so his sword gun one-shot 4 times instead of 1. But even with, I think, 3 Angron resurrections, I think 1 Avatar of Cain died. These specific circumstances, again, are obviously impossible, but the point is that Angron isn't as powerful as you think. In spite of costing about 80 points more, he's actually a fair bit weaker than Cain in all ways but the wounds. Cain has strength 16 and 8 for his attacks, Angron has strength 14 and 7. Cain halves all damage, and while Angron can resurrect, it's entirely possible whatever killed him in the first place can just do it again. If your opponent has managed to space out their troops correctly, it's not at all unlikely the dickhead with a Shadow Sword will just turn their gun on Angron again and blow him away. His resurrection mitigates how easy it is to get rid of him as a big scary character model. It doesn't mean it's suddenly impossible. Don't fly him into a crowd expecting him to carry just because he's fast and hits hard. That's a path to many a lost game, speaking from personal experience with similar giant monster units. For an army-wide thing, the whole Blessings of Khorne feature can be a bit random as well. While early on, you're almost guaranteed to get something useful. As the match goes on, you might find yourself re-rolling the same damn blessings the entire time. There's ways to re-roll the blessing, there's ways to get more dice, but the moment you make a mechanic a dice roll, you need to be aware of the possibility that sometimes the
Not
dice just aren't
working.
going to favor you, and sometimes that'll really suck when it happens.
Especially for me.
Mathematically being invincible doesn't mean much in the practical scenario where you roll nothing but ones and your opponent nothing but sixes. Last roll's downside is just me griping again, I'll be real. Another mid-combat patrol. It isn't the worst, and if you like the Jackals and their detachments, it's actually quite good, I'd argue. But the Demon Prince, I wager you'll get sick of owning 3 of if you repeat by, and there's no elites here. There's 10 pieces of chaff, 10 basic infantry, because in this army I count Cornate Berserkers as basic infantry, the Demon Prince, and a Master of Executions. Solid box, but it bores me a bit. Fit some 8
I
bound
agree.
GW, you can afford to give us slightly bigger boxes and slightly more savings. But now I'm just grumbling about money, so it's probably time to
True.
wrap up. And those were the World Eaters. Tragic to some, stupid to others, but denying them being able to rip and tear until it's done is a fool's errand. Give them the respect or at least the safe distance they deserve, lest you find your skull becoming just another one for the Skull Throne. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the
Thank you,
Butchers, Meals, and World
bankers.
Eaters, blocking out all positive emotions as I sit there stewing in incompetent rage. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe.
Support
with the camera.
Pancreas.
Thank you
Whoa.
for watching and take care.
Whoa. I'll wait his last bit and see before I have my final thoughts. Not about the video, but of the chaos or of the World Eaters. Because I can't, like, as y'all noticed, I don't speak too much when it comes to the tabletop because I haven't played at all of the tabletop. I would like to, but I am a shy individual and and I don't have a GameStop? No. Game store near me, really. It's like an hour away, I think, for me. So, right now, all my models and any future models are mostly just art projects till I, meet someone that plays. And then I get my ass kicked.
World Eater, I hardly know her. I hardly know her. I hardly know her. Why are you still here? You hoping for a good night kiss? I'm going to tuck you in and read you a bedtime story?
Yes.
That's what this video was for, 5-head. Now move along,
Yes.
I have EU5 to play. I have a biological need to reform the Roman Empire in historical paradox games, and I have to set up Byzantine America before Spain and England get there. And that's
Byzantine
not even
America.
mentioning France being the final boss of every paradox game that isn't Hearts of Iron, and Stellaris, I guess, but that one doesn't really count.
Thank you. Alrighty. Yeah. This was Pancreas's video, Do or Don't World Eaters. Please support by watching this video. I'll have a link in the bottom of the description. And if you don't mind, I would love to receive a comment. I respond to them. So if you say something in the comments, like the video, subscribe, that would be great. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye-bye.